The town of Mabala woke every morning with the sound of birds and the smell of wet earth. The sun would rise slowly, lighting up the clay houses, the narrow roads, and the children rushing to school with their small books and wide smiles. Among the people who woke before the sun was a woman named Amina. She lived in a small hut near the edge of the village. Her house was made of mud and roofed with rusted tin sheets that sang softly when rain fell. Amina's job was simple. She worked as a cleaner at the village school. Every morning, while others still slept, she carried her old broom, a bucket of water, and a smile that never seemed to fade. She swept the classrooms, cleaned the blackboards, and washed the toilets. Her work was not easy, but she did it with care. To her, the school was not just a building, it was a place that gave life to dreams. The teachers liked that the school was always clean, but they never paid much attention to Amina herself. She was quiet, humble, and always kept to her work. Even when the sun burned hot and sweat ran down her face, she hummed soft songs from her childhood. The children sometimes waved at her, but most were too busy playing or talking. Amina never minded. She loved to see their laughter fill the air. But one morning, things began to change. A teacher named Mr. Pato noticed something strange. He saw Amina go into the toilet early in the morning, just after she arrived at the school. She stayed there for a long time, longer than anyone thought was normal. At first, no one cared, but after a few days, whispers began. "What is she doing in there every day?" asked one teacher. Another replied with a laugh, "Maybe she's sleeping inside. The toilets are cool in the morning." The word spread fast. The cook at the canteen heard about it, then the children, then the shopkeeper near the school gate. Soon, everyone had their own story to tell. Some said Amina was lazy. Others said she hid things in the toilet. A few even joked that she was performing strange magic. No one asked her directly, but everyone talked. The laughter followed her wherever she went. Amina could hear the giggles and the whispers, but she never responded. She simply smiled, lowered her head, and continued cleaning. When someone passed by her with a mocking smile, she greeted them politely, as if she did not notice the gossip. Her silence made some people even more curious. "Why doesn't she explain herself?" they said. "Maybe she really has something to hide." One afternoon, while sweeping near the classrooms, Amina overheard two teachers talking near the staff room. "I think she's strange," said one of them, a woman named Madame Doro. "Who spends that much time in a toilet? It's not normal." The other teacher laughed softly. "She's harmless, Doro. Maybe she just likes her privacy." But Madame Doro shook her head. "No, I don't trust quiet people. They always have secrets." Amina's broom stopped for a moment, her hands still. She looked down at the floor and took a deep breath. Her heart ached, but she said nothing. She continued sweeping as if she hadn't heard a thing. That evening, when school ended, Amina walked home slowly. The road was dusty, and the wind blew gently through the trees. As she walked, she greeted people politely, but some only nodded in return. She passed a group of children who were playing near the well. One of them whispered loudly, "That's the toilet woman." The others laughed. Amina's steps slowed. Her heart felt heavy, but she forced a small smile and kept walking. When she reached home, she sat outside her hut, listening to the sound of crickets. The stars appeared one by one in the dark sky. She closed her eyes and whispered to herself, "Let them talk. The truth will speak for me one day." The next morning, she woke before dawn, as always. The air was cool, and mist covered the fields. She tied her scarf, picked up her broom and bucket, and began her walk to the school. Along the road, she met old Mama Quito, who sold bananas near the gate. Amina," the old woman called out kindly, "people talk too much these days. Don't let them break your spirit." Amina smiled. "I know, Mama. I do not mind. The world talks, but God listens." When she reached the school, she went straight to her work. The sun was rising, and a golden light touched the walls of the classrooms. She swept every corner, washed the windows, and finally entered the toilet. She stayed there, just like before, while the rest of the school buzzed with morning noise. Outside, two teachers noticed her again. "There she goes," whispered one. "Always hiding in there. What could she possibly be doing?" "I told you," said the other. "Something is not right." The students began to notice too. As they waited for the bell, they whispered among themselves. Some laughed. Some looked curious. One bold boy, Musa, even said, "Maybe she's hiding treasure in the toilet." Everyone laughed, and Amina could hear their voices through the wall. She felt a sharp pain in her heart, but she stayed quiet, finishing what she was doing before coming out with her usual smile. When she stepped out, some students looked away, pretending not to notice her. Others snickered behind their hands. Amina greeted them with her calm voice. "Good morning, children." They answered softly, "Good morning," but their eyes were full of questions. As the day went on, the gossip grew. Even at lunchtime, people talked. The teachers gathered under a tree, eating rice and beans, their voices low but curious. "Do you think she's hiding something bad?" asked Madame Doro. "Maybe we should tell the headmaster." Said another. "I don't want to accuse her of anything, but it is strange." That afternoon, Mr. Bako, the headmaster, called Amina to his office. She walked in quietly, holding her hands together. "Amina," he said kindly, "you are a good worker. The school is always clean. But some people have been saying you spend too much time in the toilet every morning. Is there something you need to tell me?" Amina looked down at her worn shoes. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said softly, "Sir, I understand people are talking. But I am not doing anything wrong. What I do there is between me and God. One day they will know." Mr. Bako studied her face. She looked calm, not guilty. He sighed. "All right, Amina. Just be careful. People love to talk." She nodded and smiled faintly. "Thank you, sir." When she left the office, the sun was already setting. The golden light painted the school walls, and the children were leaving for home. Amina walked slowly toward the gate, passing by a group of students who stared at her. She heard one whisper, "She's weird." Another replied, "Maybe she's praying in there." Amina smiled softly as she walked away. The road home was quiet. Birds flew low across the sky, and the wind carried the scent of wood smoke. She could still hear the laughter in her head, but she pushed it away. Her heart was calm. She knew why she did what she did, and that was enough for her. That night, as the stars appeared again, she sat outside her hut with a small candle burning beside her. She opened a tiny notebook and wrote names inside it, names of the children she saw at school, the ones who laughed, and the ones who looked sad. She prayed for them quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. May they find kindness. May they grow in wisdom. May they learn to see good where others see nothing. When she closed the book, she looked up at the night sky and smiled. The days passed, and the small gossip about Amina began to grow into full stories that reached every corner of the town. What had started as whispers among the teachers was now being told at the market, by the well, and even in evening gatherings under the mango trees. Everyone had something to say about the quiet woman from the school who spent too much time in the toilet. Some said she was strange. Others claimed she was hiding something dangerous. A few even joked that she was performing strange rituals to bring bad luck or summon spirits. The truth was far from all of that, but no one cared to ask. People in Mabila liked stories, and this one, with its mystery, was too interesting to let go. Amina noticed the change. When she walked through the village, people looked at her differently. They used to greet her politely before, but now they looked at her with suspicion or laughed behind her back. At the market, when she tried to buy vegetables, two women whispered to each other while looking at her. She could feel their eyes follow her every step. She held her basket tighter and said nothing. She was not angry. She was only sad that people she had known all her life now saw her as a stranger. At the school, things were no better. Even her friend Tari, the woman who once shared lunch with her under the big tree, had begun to change. Tari had always liked Amina's calm nature and often said she wished she had her patience. But now, the pressure from others made her uncomfortable. One afternoon, when Amina came to sit beside her, Tari stood up quickly, pretending to go somewhere. "I'll come back soon," she said with a nervous smile. She never did. Amina sat there alone, eating her rice in silence. She could hear other teachers laughing nearby, and though she didn't catch all the words, she knew they were talking about her. She looked down at her food and whispered to herself, "Let them laugh. I know the truth. The children were no kinder. They had picked up the same behavior from the adults. When Amina walked past them, they would whisper and giggle. Sometimes, one of them would say, "Maybe she's talking to ghosts," and the others would burst into laughter. Amina tried to smile through it, but her heart grew heavier with each passing day. One morning, as the sun rose and painted the schoolyard with golden light, the headmaster, Mr. Bako, sent for her. He was a tall man with a serious face, but his eyes were kind. When Amina entered his office, she stood quietly by the door, holding her old broom in one hand. "Amina," he began, "please sit." She sat carefully on the edge of the chair, her hands folded in her lap. "I've been hearing many things," he continued. "People are talking. Teachers, students, even villagers. They all say you spend too much time in the toilet every morning. Some think it's strange. Some are worried." Amina looked down. She did not look surprised. She had expected this. "Sir," she said softly, "I understand what they say. But I promise, what I do there is not wrong." Mr. Bako sighed. "Amina, I believe you. But this talk is becoming a problem. It's making people uncomfortable." "I know," she said, her voice calm but steady. "But I cannot stop. What I do is small, but it means something to me. I do no harm to anyone." He frowned slightly. "Can you at least tell me what it is? So that I can stop the rumors." Amina smiled sadly. "It's not time yet, sir. One day they will know. That day, no one will laugh." The headmaster looked at her for a long moment. Her face showed no fear, only quiet strength. Finally, he nodded. "All right, Amina. I will not ask again. But please, be careful. People fear what they do not understand." She stood up and bowed her head slightly. "Thank you, sir. I will be careful." When she walked out of the office, the air outside felt heavy. A group of students stood near the door, pretending to talk but clearly waiting to see her. As soon as she stepped out, they began giggling. One of them whispered something, and the others laughed louder. Amina walked past them without a word, her steps slow but steady. She went back to her cleaning, sweeping the dusty corridors and humming a quiet tune. But inside, her heart was tired. She had never asked for attention, never wished to be noticed. All she wanted was to do her work and bring a little light into the world in her own way. Later that day, during lunch break, she sat alone again under the tree. Tari passed by with another teacher and looked at her briefly but didn't stop. Amina smiled at her, but Tari looked away. The laughter from nearby tables reached her ears, sharp and cruel. She took a slow breath and whispered to herself, "One day they will know." That evening, as the school bell rang and children ran home shouting and laughing, Amina stayed behind to finish cleaning. The classrooms were empty now, the desks quiet, the sun setting outside. The sound of her broom filled the room, slow and rhythmic. She liked that sound, it made her feel calm. When she was done, she sat on a bench for a moment, looking out the window. She saw the mango trees swaying gently in the evening breeze and the sky turning orange. She thought of her mother, who had once told her, "When the world misunderstands you, do not fight it. Just keep doing what is right." Those words had stayed with her always. On her way home, she passed by the same children who had laughed at her in the morning. They were still playing near the gate, kicking a small ball made of rags. One of them saw her and shouted, "There goes the toilet lady." The others laughed again. Amina stopped for a moment and looked at them, her eyes gentle. She didn't scold them. She simply said, "Be kind, my children. Words can wound more than stones." Then she walked away. The children looked at each other, surprised. They didn't understand what she meant, but something in her voice made them quiet for a while. When she reached home, the sun had disappeared behind the hills. She lit a small lamp and sat on the floor. She took out her old notebook, the same one she carried everywhere. She opened it and began to write names inside, names of the teachers, students, and even the ones who had mocked her. Beside each name, she wrote small wishes. May she find peace. May he grow in kindness. May they learn truth. Her handwriting was simple, but her heart was full of hope. She closed the book and whispered a small prayer. "God, let them see someday. Not for my pride, but for their hearts. Then she placed the book inside her bag and sat quietly. The sound of crickets filled the night, and the moon shone through the window. She thought of Mr. Bucko's face, kind but worried, and of Tari, who no longer sat beside her. She thought of the laughter and the whispers that followed her everywhere. But none of it made her bitter. She smiled softly to herself. "Let them talk," she said. "One day they will know." The next morning she would wake again before the sun, tie her scarf, and walk to the school. The world might not understand her yet, but she had no doubt. Every step she took was filled with quiet faith, faith that the truth would find its way, even through laughter and lies. And as she blew out her lamp that night, the soft wind that passed through her window felt almost like a whisper of comfort, as if the universe itself had heard her promise. The sun had barely risen when the school in Mabila began to fill with voices and laughter. Birds sang in the trees, and the sound of footsteps echoed through the halls as children hurried to their classes. Among them was little Kasai, a bright and playful girl known for her curiosity. She was always asking questions, always touching things she shouldn't, and always smiling. That morning, she ran to her classroom in a rush, holding her lunch tightly in one hand and waving to her friends with the other. But halfway through the morning, she realized something. Her school bag was missing. Her eyes widened and she whispered to herself, "Oh no! My books! My pencils!" She quickly searched under the desk and behind the chair, but the bag was nowhere to be found. Then she remembered. She had gone to the toilet earlier before class started. Perhaps she had left it there. Kasai raised her hand and asked softly, "Teacher, may I go out for a moment?" The teacher nodded, though a little annoyed by her constant movement. She dashed out of the classroom, her little feet tapping against the concrete floor. The school was quiet now since most of the students were in class. Only the wind and the sound of a broom sweeping could be heard. As Kasai walked down the corridor toward the toilets, she heard a faint voice. It was gentle, slow, and warm, almost like someone talking to the wind. When she reached the door, she noticed it wasn't closed properly. It was open just a little. A soft light shone through the small gap. Curiosity danced in her eyes. She was about to knock, but then she heard her own name. "Bless Kasai. Help her learn, protect her family," came the quiet voice. Kasai froze. Her small heart began to beat fast. Who was speaking her name? Slowly, she leaned forward and peeked through the open door. What she saw made her eyes widen in wonder. Inside the toilet, the walls were not dirty or dull like she had always thought. They were covered with small pieces of paper, each neatly placed and written in careful handwriting. Some were stuck high up near the small window, while others were low near the floor. Every paper carried kind words: "You are smart, you can do great things, be kind to others, you are loved, never give up." The air smelled faintly of flowers, and the place seemed brighter than usual. In the middle of the floor knelt Amina, the woman everyone gossiped about. Her eyes were closed, her hands were clasped together, and her face looked peaceful. A small notebook lay open before her. She was whispering softly, naming the students one by one. "Bless Musa. Give him courage to stop fighting in class. Bless Tari's little boy. Keep him healthy. Bless Kasai. Help her learn well and protect her family." Kasai's mouth fell open. She covered it quickly with her small hand. She had never seen anyone pray like that before, not just for themselves, but for others, for everyone, even for children who made noise, even for teachers who scolded her, even for people who laughed at her. There was a little bowl beside Amina, filled with folded notes. Kasai watched as she took one, opened it, and read it aloud. "You are not alone." Then she smiled, closed her eyes again, and continued her prayer. The light from a small window fell on her face, making her look almost glowing. For the first time, Kasai felt something she couldn't explain, a mixture of surprise, peace, and warmth. She had come to find her bag, but she found something far greater. For a moment, she wanted to step inside, to tell Amina that she was sorry for all the laughter and whispers. But she didn't want to interrupt. So she slowly stepped back, careful not to make a sound. She pressed her small hand against her chest. Her heart felt light, full of a strange joy. When she reached the classroom, she didn't tell anyone what she saw. Not yet. She quietly sat at her desk, her eyes still wide with amazement. The teacher asked, did you find your bag?" And she nodded, even though she had forgotten all about it. All day long, she couldn't stop thinking about what she had seen. During playtime, her friends tried to get her to run with them, but she just smiled and shook her head. Her mind was far away, still in that quiet toilet, surrounded by words of kindness and prayer. That evening, when she went home, she sat near her mother while helping her peel cassava. Her mother noticed that she was unusually quiet. "Kasai," she said softly, "you are not your usual self today. Did something happen at school?" Kasai thought for a moment, then said, "Mama, can someone pray for people even if those people don't like them?" Her mother looked surprised by the question. "Yes, my child," she said gently. "That is the best kind of prayer, the one made for others with no expectation in return." Kasai smiled. "I saw someone do that today." Her mother tilted her head. "Who, my dear?" Kasai hesitated for a moment, then whispered, "Amina." Her mother blinked. "The cleaning woman from the school?" Kasai nodded eagerly. "Yes, Mama. She prays every morning. In the toilet. But not like people think. She writes good words on the wall. Nice words, Mama, and she prays for everyone. She even said my name. She prayed for me." Her mother stopped peeling for a moment. She looked at her daughter with a thoughtful expression. "Are you sure, Kasai?" "Yes, Mama. I saw it with my own eyes." The woman smiled softly and said, "Then maybe the world has been unfair to her. You must be kind to her, Kasai. Promise me that." "I promise," Kasai said. The next day, at school, Kasai couldn't keep it to herself any longer. When her teacher called her to read in class, she stood up and did her best. After she finished, she said, "Teacher, may I tell you something?" The teacher raised an eyebrow. "What is it, Kasai?" She took a deep breath. "Amina is not strange. She is not lazy. She prays for us. Every day. She writes kind words on the walls. She says our names when she prays." The classroom went silent. Everyone looked at her, confused. One boy laughed softly, but Kasai continued, her voice strong. "I saw it myself. She prayed for me. She said, 'Bless Kasai, help her learn, protect her family.'" The teacher didn't know what to say. The children stared at her, some with disbelief, others with curiosity. After a moment, the teacher said quietly, "Sit down, Kasai." But the seed had been planted. At lunch, the story spread quickly, but this time, it wasn't gossip filled with laughter, it was filled with wonder. Children whispered to each other, "Is it true? Did she really pray for us?" Even Tari, who had stopped sitting with Amina, looked uncertain. That afternoon, when Amina walked past the classrooms, the children didn't laugh. They watched her quietly, almost respectfully. A few even smiled shyly when she looked their way. Amina, unaware of what had changed, simply nodded with her gentle smile and continued sweeping the corridor. Later that evening, as the sun went down, she entered the toilet once more. She knelt on the floor as always, her notebook in front of her. She whispered names softly, one by one. Outside the door, Kasai stood again, just for a moment, listening. She didn't want to interrupt. She placed a small flower she had picked from the school garden near the door and whispered, "Thank you, Amina." Then she walked away, smiling to herself, as the warm light of sunset fell across the schoolyard. Inside, Amina opened her eyes for a second and looked at the little flower by the door. She smiled faintly, whispering, "Thank you, child." And then, she closed her eyes and continued her prayer. The next morning in Mabala school began as usual. The ringing of the bell, the sound of small feet running through the dusty yard, and teachers calling children into their classrooms. But beneath the noise, something had changed. There was a soft quietness in the air, the kind that comes when hearts begin to listen. The story Kasai had told the day before had already spread. It had passed from one classroom to another, from one whisper to another, until even the teachers were talking about it. At first, some of them didn't believe her. "Amina, that quiet woman who cleans," they asked. "Why would she pray for us?" Others were simply curious. So, during the first break, a few teachers walked together to the toilets. They pushed the door open slowly, expecting to see nothing but empty walls. But when the sunlight fell inside, they froze. The walls were covered in dozens of small pieces of paper, each written neatly in blue ink. One of the teachers, Madame Zuri, stepped closer and began to read. "Be kind to yourself," one note said. "The world is heavy, but you are strong," said another. On the far wall, another message read, "You are here for a reason." The teachers stared in silence. There were so many messages, gentle, kind, and full of warmth. None of them were fancy or poetic, but each one carried truth. Then they noticed something else. Near the floor, by the side of a small bucket, there was a notebook. It was open, filled with names, the names of the students and teachers. Next to each name was a short line, a small prayer or wish. "Help her find joy. Give him courage. Keep her healthy. Let him learn kindness." It was as if Amina had been carrying the whole school in her heart. Madame Zuri touched one of the notes with her hand and whispered, "She has been doing this for us all this time." When Amina came by later, holding her mop, she stopped at the door. She saw the teachers standing there, reading in silence. For a moment, she looked unsure, afraid that she had done something wrong. She lowered her eyes and said softly, "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cause trouble. I only wanted to bring a little hope to the children." Mr. Bako, the head teacher, stepped forward. His face, usually stern and serious, looked gentle now. "Amina," he said quietly, "you have done nothing wrong. You have done more for this school than any of us." Amina's eyes widened in surprise. She didn't know what to say. She simply bowed her head and smiled shyly. Word spread quickly among the students. During lunch, many of them went to see the notes themselves. They stood in small groups, reading each message out loud. Some giggled softly, but not in mockery. It was a happy, amazed kind of laughter. Others stood quietly, tracing the words with their fingers. One boy, who was often scolded for fighting, found a note that said, "You can change your story any time." He stood there for a long time, staring at it. Later that day, when another student pushed him, he didn't fight back. The teacher who saw it smiled quietly to herself. By the end of the week, something beautiful began to happen. Before class started each morning, a few students began to gather near the toilet wall. They would read one or two notes out loud to each other, then smile and walk to class. It became their morning ritual. Soon, even teachers began joining in. Every day, Amina came earlier than before. She brought more paper, more kind words, and a few flowers she picked from her small garden. She didn't do it for attention. She simply wanted to fill the place with goodness. One morning, as she was putting up a new note, she heard footsteps behind her. When she turned, she saw the head teacher, Mr. Bako. He stood there quietly for a moment, holding a piece of paper in his hand. "I wrote something," he said awkwardly. "May I add it?" Amina smiled gently and nodded. He placed his paper on the wall. It read, "True work is done in silence." The next day, teachers began bringing their own notes too. Madame Zuri wrote, "Every child carries a light." Another teacher added, "Kindness begins with listening." Even the students joined in. Soon, the walls were full of colorful papers, some crooked, some small, but all meaningful. The toilet that had once been a place of gossip and laughter became a place of peace and reflection. Kaysai watched all this with a smile. She often helped Amina cut paper and write new messages. Sometimes she would ask, "What should we write today?" Amina would laugh softly and say, "Something simple, my child. Simple words stay longer in the heart." One day, the district education officer came to visit the school. He noticed how calm and cheerful the students were. "What have you done here?" he asked the head teacher. "I've never seen such happiness in a school before." Mr. Bako smiled and said, "It began with a woman's quiet kindness." He led the officer to the toilet and showed him the walls. The man read a few notes and nodded slowly. "You should be proud," he said. "This is more than teaching, this is soul work." That evening, as the sun began to set, the schoolyard was filled with children playing and laughing. Amina stood by the doorway, watching them with soft eyes. For the first time in many years, she felt truly seen. Not because people praised her, but because they understood. Tari, her old friend who had once stopped eating with her, walked up to her shyly. "Amina," she said, "I'm sorry. I should have never believed the gossip. Amina smiled. It's all right, Tari. Sometimes, people need time to see clearly. I brought something for you, Tari said, handing her a small notebook. For your new prayers. Amina held it gently, her eyes glistening. Thank you. From that day onward, every morning before classes began, the sound of children reading kind words filled the air. They stood together, smiling, sometimes laughing, but always with respect. The teachers joined too. Even the head teacher, who had once doubted her, stood beside them one morning and said, Amina has taught us that true work is done in silence, not for praise, but for love. Amina looked around at all of them, the students, the teachers, the once doubtful, the once mocking, and her heart filled with quiet joy. She didn't need applause. The peace in their faces was enough. As the sun rose higher, painting the school in gold, Kaysai tugged at her dress and asked, Amina, why do you write these words every day? Amina smiled and said, Because words can heal, my child. And sometimes, the smallest words are the strongest. And so, the lesson spread, not through noise, not through pride, but through gentle kindness. The toilet became a place of hope, the school became a place of love, and Amina, once mocked and misunderstood, became a silent teacher whose lessons touched every heart. That evening, when everyone had gone home, Amina walked back into the quiet school. She lit a small candle, placed it by the wall of notes, and whispered, May this light never fade. The flame flickered softly, dancing across the words. It was as if the walls themselves were smiling. Outside, the wind carried laughter from far away, the sound of children who had learned not just to read and write, but to care. And in the soft glow of the setting sun, Amina closed her eyes and whispered, Thank you. The sun rose softly over the small town of Mabala, painting the red roofs with gold. The sound of children's laughter floated through the morning air as they walked to school, carrying their small books and lunchboxes. Mabala School, once filled with noise, quarrels, and gossip, now had a new spirit. The walls seemed brighter, the classrooms livelier, and even the wind that passed through the open windows carried peace. Visitors who came from nearby towns always asked the same question, What changed here? When they stepped inside, they could feel something special, something invisible but powerful. The teachers greeted the students with smiles, the children shared their food, and there was kindness in every corner. No one shouted anymore. No one teased. Even the older students helped the younger ones carry water or sweep the classroom floors. The air was full of friendship and calm. At the heart of it all was Amina. She still wore her simple dress and carried her mop and bucket every morning. She still came before sunrise when the world was quiet and peaceful. She still went to the same toilet where she had spent those long mornings that once made people whisper. But now, when people saw her walking there, they did not laugh or gossip. They smiled. Some greeted her warmly. Others nodded respectfully. And a few even followed her after work, hoping to learn her quiet way of life. The school had become famous for its peace and unity. Teachers from other villages came to visit, hoping to understand how it had changed so much. When they asked the head teacher, Mr. Bako, he always said the same thing, It began with one woman and her heart of kindness. Then he would tell them about Amina, how she wrote small notes with gentle words, how she prayed for everyone in silence, and how her kindness slowly melted the hearts of those around her. The visitors were often amazed. All that from a woman who cleans the school? They would ask in disbelief. And Mr. Bako would nod with a smile. Yes, he said, sometimes the greatest teachers are not the ones who stand in front of the class, but the ones who work quietly in the background. One day, a group of teachers from a neighboring town came to visit. They brought notebooks to learn how Mabala School had become such a happy place. They watched as the children entered their classrooms in neat lines, smiling and greeting one another politely. Before class started, one of the students stood by the toilet door and read out loud a few words written on the wall. You are brave, the student read. You can change the world with kindness. The teachers looked at each other with surprise. They followed the sound and found themselves standing before the same toilet that had once been the center of gossip. The walls were still full of colorful papers, some old, some new. Flowers decorated the corners. The smell of soap and fresh water filled the air. The visitors walked in silence, reading the words that covered every space. One teacher wiped her eyes and whispered, This is more than a toilet. This is a room of hope. When Amina arrived later, carrying her bucket, she stopped, surprised to see so many strangers there. She greeted them shyly. "Good morning." They smiled at her. "Are you the woman who writes these words?" one asked gently. Amina nodded, her voice soft. "I just write what I wish others would tell me when I feel tired or forgotten." The teachers looked at her with admiration. "You have changed this place," one said. Amina shook her head slowly. "No," she replied, "I only planted a seed." The children watered it with their hearts. After they left, Amina continued her routine, wiping the walls, straightening the papers, and adding new messages. She wrote slowly, carefully, as if each word carried weight. Her handwriting was neat, steady, and full of care. That morning, she wrote, "Small acts can make big changes." She pinned it near the door where everyone could see it. Kasai, now a little older, often helped her. She brought fresh paper and colored pens. "Amina," she said one day, "people from other towns come here to see what you do. You're famous now." Amina laughed softly. "Famous?" she said with a smile. "No, my child. The words are famous, not me. They belong to everyone who reads them." As the days passed, Mabala School continued to bloom like a garden. The students grew kinder, the teachers more patient, and the parents more thankful. The village, too, began to change. Neighbors helped one another more. Farmers shared tools. Women who sold fruit in the market started giving small discounts to children who worked hard in school. It was as if the quiet kindness that began in that small toilet had flowed into every corner of Mabala. Sometimes, when visitors came and saw how joyful the children were, they asked, "What magic do you use here?" The teachers would smile and answer, "No magic, just love written in small letters." One afternoon, a group of parents gathered for a meeting. They wanted to honor Amina. She tried to say no, saying she was just doing her job, but they insisted. The head teacher stood up and said, "We used to think Amina was only cleaning our floors. But now we see, she was also cleaning our hearts." Everyone clapped, and Amina lowered her eyes, shy but happy. Later that evening, when everyone had gone, she walked to the toilet one more time. The setting sun cast a golden glow on the walls. She ran her hand over the papers, reading a few of them softly. Some of them were hers. Some were written by students and teachers. One read, "Thank you, Amina. You taught us that light can come from the quietest place." Amina smiled and whispered, "They learned well." Outside, the sound of laughter and songs from the students echoed through the air. Amina stood quietly, her eyes watching the sky turn orange and purple. A cool wind brushed against her face, and she felt peace deep inside her heart. A few days later, another visitor came, a reporter from the nearby city. He had heard about the School of Kindness and wanted to write about it. He interviewed the teachers, the students, and finally Amina. When he asked, "Why do you keep going back to that toilet every morning?" she paused for a moment and then said simply, "Because people forget too easily that they are good. I just remind them." The reporter smiled, deeply moved. When he left, he knew he would never forget her words. Weeks later, the story of Mabala School was printed in newspapers. People across the region read about it. Some schools even started their own wall of kind words. But for Amina, nothing changed. She still woke up before dawn, still cleaned, still prayed, and still wrote her little notes. Sometimes new teachers who hadn't heard the story yet whispered among themselves when they saw her walk to the toilet early in the morning. They would laugh softly and ask, "What does she do in there?" But the others, those who knew, would smile and reply, "If only you knew." And everyone who heard those words would fall silent, remembering how it all began. In the evenings, when Amina walked home through the narrow road, she often met parents and children who greeted her warmly. Some handed her flowers. Others simply smiled and said thank you. She never asked for anything in return. Their smiles were enough for her. One night, as she sat by her small lamp writing new notes for the next day, she looked out her window at the stars and whispered to herself, "Kindness travels faster than gossip." She smiled softly, folded her papers neatly, and placed them beside her bag.